welcome to the JTM Community Podcast, where we are building a community that you can bank on and where you belong. I'm your host, Jason Melvin. We have another special episode in which we have three different guests. We'll get into that in just a moment. Of course, if you'd like to touch base with me, you can do so at the website j-tm.community/podcast if you want to connect for advancement advising, as well as additional resources both in the local Mount Pleasant, Michigan area or national resources as well. You can also check out our social media links, which are on the top right of the site. The easiest thing made for your convenience is our Facebook, all the voting, polls, engagement. It's typically daily information that goes out, whether it's motivational, inspirational, or a sense of humor. Again, you can find those same kind of things through our TikTok. It's not necessarily our videos, but more so the liked videos. Without further ado, our guest for this video on your topic that you selected through your vote on communication is our buddy Mason, which has been on the podcast before, our good friend Will, who is also a teacher, and another close friend, Branson, who is a vet and is now a laborer through the HVAC system. I hope that you enjoy. Mason, when you think of the idea or concept of communication, what comes to mind? What does that mean to you?
Yeah, so communication is obviously between people, right? I guess it could be between other things as well. Like I can communicate to my dog, let's say. But really, when we're talking about communication, it's relating an idea. So no matter what kind of language you're using, or whether that's body language, tones, the influx of my voice, all that stuff relays an idea to another person that we're hoping that they can understand our position a little bit better. So to put that in context, if let's say my wife was mad at me, she's going to say things in a certain tone that then relays that emotion, and I can understand the fact that she is upset with something that's going on, right? Which is going to then key me into follow-on questions, allowing us to understand each other better. So one of the more interesting things I think in today's world with communication that we are still trying to figure out as human beings is the digital world, because a lot of those context clues that we pick up on and have evolved to understand are no longer available. And I'll notice it when people read somebody else's text message. They will read it. If they read it out loud, they'll read it in the tone of voice that they infer the message to be in. So if that person thinks, like somebody reading a text message, if they think that person is being whatever, arrogant or mad in the message, they'll read it in that tone without fully understanding if that's how that person meant the message. So I think it's very interesting right now to understand communication. Understand how we can, how we need to do it better, especially with evolving or emerging technologies. So that way we don't need to be filled with like anger and mad, making assumptions about other people.
Absolutely. Kind of when you don't have the additional cues, so whether that's tone or body language, right, then the message that is received is already filtered through our own bias and our own perceptions. I can't tell you how many times, even in person, that my expression of joy or compliment, because I tend to be intentional of expressions of affection, right, to varying degrees. So I'm not going to meet a random stranger and like pour an awkward amount of love into them, right?
Sure.
No innuendo implied. At the same time, even when I was going through the counseling program and people would say things and I would like acknowledge those and like compliment, whether it's like their willingness to be vulnerable with other students, kind of going above and beyond. I remember one of the professors I had in a groups like oriented course. I had expressed my appreciation for a correction that she helped me with, right? And it took probably 6 weeks before people actually began to learn. So she reprimanded me in that moment for being sarcastic, but I wasn't being
Yeah.
sarcastic. I was truly
Yeah.
expressing my gratitude for her help, but because of her own, I'm guessing, previous
Bias.
experiences and her own perception, she thought I was taking a jab at her. But I was truly expressing my gratitude for her helping me be better at that thing, which was
Yeah, man.
fascinating because of the program I was in. Right, that should not have, at least in my belief, that shouldn't have been the assumption, but it was. You're about to say something, but I'm sorry I cut you off.
Yeah, I mean, what you're talking about is people's ability to understand one another, right?
Mhm.
So, and we all behave different ways, and you can go into personality traits little ways, but I think you and I are very similar in our personality, where very logic dominated. Like
Oh
we
yeah.
we look at the world in a certain way, and a lot of the times, one of the main characteristics that is associated with that personality type is cold-hearted, acts
Hmm.
like a robot. It's because we just don't express emotions like some other people do, right? So
Hmm.
our expression is typically inward, not outward.
Sure.
So if people don't take the time to understand that, yeah, it's exactly what you're talking about. Like I could be happy and very content in the world, but not smiling, not putting those very similar things.
Hmm.
Where like my wife, that's very like she does a lot of emotional expression. If I'm not like, oh my God, that's the most amazing thing ever, like that's how she expresses it, right? Like it's gonna
Sure.
be this big animated thing, and that's how she expresses, let's say,
Hmm.
excitement. So when I don't do that, it's to her, she looks at that and goes, oh man, you must be really mad about this. And I'm like,
Hmm.
no, like I am actually really happy. I don't express that outward, but that's also
Yeah.
part of the context of like expression that we're talking about, right?
Yep.
That
Oh, lost
oh,
your camera.
yeah, sorry about that. It's all part of that expression and like how we communicate with each other,
Hmm.
and in those things that we pick up on. So by being able to understand one another, which is really what referencing back to what I started with this conversation with, I think that if we communicate to understand, not communicate to prove a point to people, I
Hmm.
think that's where we really we win in life in general, because
Hmm.
you find middle ground, you find that you will grow as a person, and a lot of things that you are thinking or feeling or doing makes your life way better. So
Yeah.
that's something that I always caution people about. If they're just like talking at people rather than talking to them to understand them or take a stance of learning, I think is crucially important to do that.
Oh, absolutely. In all relationships, whether it's personal, professional, in any degree of intimacy, is if you go into a dialogue as a competitor, you're looking to win, not resolve. But if you
Yeah,
go in with resolution as the focus, like you're saying, and you're going to be much more likely to understand, to being flexible on your own beliefs about a thing. But yeah, when people go into an argument, I see it constantly with couples and families where it just turns into a pissing match. And most of the time, they get so sidetracked from what the initial conversation was that becomes irrelevant because now what they're talking about are the last 10 things over the last 3 weeks that the other person did wrong, that they held on to, their frustration with the employee over the last 6 months of falling through and not coming through or doing what was expected of them. And as I work with those folks, what comes to light is that even in the sense of work related, the employer or the supervisor had all of these things building, but didn't take the initiation to correct or help that employee in the moments that they were happening. So they just allowed repeated failures and them to get agitated and have the perception that that
yeah,
employee is a bad employee versus saying, hey, like I noticed this, blah, blah, blah. Like how can we help here, or help me understand or explain this a little bit further. That's not the approach. And that same mindset typically, like I said, I see with couples and families. the moment that they have been able to set that aside, I mean, the moment, there's an immediate 180. I remember I still work with them. It's a family, and they were all having some struggles, and they have a teen daughter, and they were processing things, and there was a lot of tension initially coming in. But the moment they were able to set that aside, their communication began to be playful. It had a level of banter, and seeing them talk about difficult things, things that innately have tension, right? Because somebody was at fault, they were able to do that very, very well. But it took that to click into the brain to say, hey, we're trying to actually make this better, and I care about these other people. What the fuck are we doing? Right.
Yeah.
And the moment that clicked in, I mean, within the session, it was like bipolar communication, right? It was very chaotic and toxic. And then the moment that clicked in, it's like, these aren't the same people.
Yeah, I mean, I've been married for 17 years, right? And there's been plenty of arguments that we've had. And I have always heard like the whole, hey, communication's the key to a successful marriage, right? But the funny thing is, nobody has ever said like what communication is, right?
Or
That what is
healthy
that
communication, yeah.
Yeah, what is that successful communication that makes a healthy relationship and a successful relationship? Because we could just scream at each other all the time and be together for 17 years. But
And
that's
that is
not
communication, just doesn't make it healthy.
that
right?
is a form. It just is non-productive, right? So I think I know from my own personal experience, like we used to get into a lot of arguments, and it would always just be a matter of like proving my point, right? And we both did it. So it was a lot of finger pointing, like, well, I did this because you did that. Well, I did that because you did this. And just back and forth you go, never actually solving anything because all you're doing is placing blame.
Yep.
So it wasn't until we got tired of that, and we're like, okay, something's got to change. Well, we discovered like we got to just stop blaming each other and look to understand one another. So we, instead of like placing blame, it was always just like, okay, yeah, I see your point on that. I was doing this thing. Let me try to work on that. And as soon as we started doing that, the level of respect back and forth grew. Like we were able to express our ideas more freely. We were able to express our emotions more freely. And ultimately, it's led to a much healthier relationship where we can just talk and
more trusting.
Yeah, absolutely, right. So that is for me like how one example of like why it's important to communicate. Same thing with what you were talking with supervisors in the professional world. You got let's say a boss or a manager who is doesn't like confrontation, so they're not going to take the time to correct somebody of doing a behavior bad. But then I've seen it before where I've had a whole group of people that would talk badly about another employee or like member behind their back. And I was like, man, this is messed up. Like, has anybody told this person that this is the way he comes across? And it was always like, no. So, I pulled one of the other supervisors aside with that member. And they sit down and had a conversation with me, kind of guiding it. And that allowed for that person to actually understand how he was coming across. Now, once you do something like that, now it's on that person to really understand, like you understand the situation, you understand what's happening. Now it's your choice if you want to continue that behavior, if you want to work on it. But I think it's a big foul if you never give that person the opportunity to change. And even if the opportunity, like you present it to them and you present the information, they're like, I don't do that. Nope, I don't believe it. Like that's on them. That's their choice then. But at least you did your ability or your due diligence to afford them that opportunity. And that's really all you can do in the world. So
yeah, and we fail as individuals or professionals or partners or friends in the moments where those things are noticed, but we don't have it's not courage, it's the willing to be uncomfortable temporarily to bring those things up, right? Is that so many people are comfort oriented or conflict avoidant that those things don't pop up. And shit, even you and I, like, we challenge each other. It doesn't happen a lot, but it happens on occasion. But it takes a level of trust to do that, which is in part a faulty ideology, right? Because there should be a baseline trust period until somebody violates that, and then that's a different kind of conversation. But if the baseline of any human being is the premise of resolution, right, then you get to talk about all of those things. And if somebody responds poorly, then you engage to understand, hey, like, help me understand like what that response is about. And but people have the discomfort. So people challenge, I shouldn't say people, there's people in my life that challenge me, and they'll say, well, you have the training and the education to be able to do that. And as much as I will admit there's a part of that that lends to that and creates a level of comfort in that, right? Anyone can talk to anyone. And if you are truly, genuinely interested what they have to say, people will just talk, right? Because you're truly investing in them, even if you don't agree. But that typically has not been what we see in recent years. And I think the whole COVID quarantine, all of this has brought that further to light because of the digital communication that you began our conversation with this morning, is that it's made it even more difficult to understand where people are coming from, and it makes it easier to blow them off.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. Though when you're saying trust, a lot of that is trust in how the message is going to be received. So I'm not even willing to express ideas with somebody if I know they're going to be combative with me about it. So they basically lose that opportunity for any sort of growth or feedback from themselves. But I have noticed, especially with younger people, especially right now, not always just the younger ones, but one of the biggest issues that I'm seeing right now is somebody's willingness to accept an idea. And we've kind of done this in our own culture, in my personal belief, where we've allowed people excuses and allowed them, kids at home in school is a great one, right? Teachers are being forced to allow kids not to turn in their assignments on time, but then still have to give them full credit, because then it'll, affect the kid adversely, make them feel like they're being left out or left behind, or whatever. But there's always a cost associated with that. And now that child doesn't understand responsibility and they think they can get away with it. So I know, especially with my own kids, like I've had to have very hard parenting moments with them because they're being allowed to do said behavior, right? So it goes the same way with communication. If somebody doesn't have to understand criticism, if they don't have to understand how to take a critique, when that time finally comes, they're going to take it much more difficult. It's going to be a more difficult situation for them because they haven't built up the resiliency or the grit to be able to understand, like, oh yeah, this is just a way for me to be better.
It's a learning opportunity.
Yeah, if parents aren't doing it, if teachers aren't doing it, that person grows up to get into, let's say, college, and then that first professor's like, nope, you don't turn it in by this time, or you get a 0, and then that's like their whole school grade because it's one paper, right? Like a midterm or a final. And then that's it. And they're like, oh my gosh, like I suck at this. I just got an F in this class. But they had no idea. They didn't have the skills, the foundation of the skills in the first place. So I think we do ourselves a disservice in raising people that cannot take criticism, because they have to be open to other ideas, and you have to be able to learn from those things. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense, in the sense of healthy communication also has healthy accountability. So if Tracy and I were talking about something and I was being an asshole, we have a relationship that she's going to be like, bro,
you're an asshole.
Like that's not acceptable. Or and vice versa, right? But again, there has to be that level of accountability, a healthy level of accountability. And I would agree that it's not uncommon for families, for the education system, and kind of society at large has hesitation in holding somebody accountable. I used to see it way back in the day when it comes to like mental health or a crisis of suicidal ideation and what that looks like. And families would back way up to the point where it became very unhealthy, right? Where the child or that person would begin to run everything because they were worried that they were going to put their child or their partner or that family member into a crisis in which they would harm themselves. And it takes a lot of work and education and understanding for them to understand, hey, that's not necessarily the case. Now, if those family members are being super toxic and creating chaos, absolutely, you're creating an environment that is conducive to mental health struggle and ideations, absolutely. But by you having healthy concern or wanting to convey support or question accountability, right? Even when it comes to parenting, it's not uncommon that those feel like they're mutually exclusive or discrepancy, right? I'm going to do my child a disservice if they have to be disciplined, where we know that that's not the case, and that's how children learn. That's how all people learn. To break it down and make it very simple, all communication is conditioning, whether it's healthy conditioning or unhealthy conditioning. That's all it is, right? Discipline is the same premise. Discipline is just a form of communication, and you can either teach somebody that this thing is okay, or you can teach them that it isn't okay. But you can teach somebody that their unhealthy behavior is okay, right? And then they continue to display those unhealthy behaviors, like not doing work or procrastinating to the point where they don't get their work done. Which in a technological world, as you had expressed, and our buddy Will, who folks who are watching this have probably seen him, being a teacher, especially through this whole pandemic thing, has had its own challenges, as you had described, in an effort to have educational accountability tends to pit him at odds with parents and families who don't have the same discipline in the home, for sure. Thank you so much, Bud. I can't express or end that any better than you had. I really appreciate you taking a little bit of time this morning to chat.
Yeah, not a problem, man.
Will, when you think of the whole idea of communication, which I know is very broad, what comes to mind? What does that mean for you?
Well, not going back to my history, but it means literally just being able to verbalize your thoughts. And if you can't verbalize them, then being able to do them in a written way, or just being able to get out what is going on in your head, anything, any emotions, thoughts, feelings. And like I said, being able to verbally or written styles, getting them out to somebody that you need to get your message across to.
Yeah, I can get down with that for sure. When I think of communication, it expands just a little bit farther, and I'm sure part of that is from my education and training, is that idea of communicating by expressing yourself in any form. So that might even be things as
music, art,
as body language.
Yeah,
right?
body language,
just like
dance.
Gestures. It also doesn't imply good or bad.
No.
The idea of communication, and the lack of it doesn't necessarily mean bad either. It's, for me, when I'm processing that idea, it's all about intent. So sometimes you have to, the best way to communicate with somebody at times is to not communicate with that person. Right. So even the lack of communication can be an expression of communication in and of itself.
Yeah, and in my case, the only time when lack of communication happens, like we've talked about a number of times when we've had these things, and just privately, is when I just get too busy and forget. So it's never a bad thing if I don't talk. It's just I've gotten too busy, and it's not that I don't think about people or have other feelings about them. It's just that I get busy and get focused on that, and then that's what I'm stuck on for the whole time, and I forget to communicate. Heck, I forget to eat for 24 hours if I'm stuck on something too much. So
I've done that a time or two myself. It's gotten me into trouble too.
yeah,
With that idea of communication, I would argue that the only poor communication is dishonest communication.
absolutely.
So well, do you mind if I pick on you and Rachel for a little bit?
Go for it.
You've shared this story when kind of what your life had looked like before you and Rachel got together, and then continuing to live your life once you were together became problematic, and it took a level of communication to address that and adjust for that. Can you kind of retell that story for folks that might be tuning in for the first time?
Yeah. So my wife and I, before we got married, we lived apart. So it was a long distance relationship, not too long, 2.5 hours, depending on the travel. But I was living my life here, doing my teaching, working on my career, and she was doing her thing there while she was finishing up with some things before we ended up deciding to get engaged and married. So until that point, and between the time that we actually got engaged and the time we got married, we were still living apart. And so I did everything to keep myself busy. I would hang out with you guys, play video games. I would go play softball 3, 4, 5 times a week, play basketball, play soccer. I had all these things that I was doing and I'm involved in when she was not here. And then once we got married, it kept going the same way because it was just like, okay, she's here. It's awesome. I never even thought of it because she wasn't expressing anything. She would come to the games with me and cheer me on. She literally uplifted her whole life and moved over here for me when we got married because I already had a stable teaching job. And that's where we kind of just decided to start. And then a few months into it, it came to a head, and literally it was, I need you to stop and cut back, not stop, but cut back because you're not spending enough time with me. And I'm like, but you're with me and this and that, because I didn't understand what she was fully saying.
She wanted quality time.
Yeah, not just her sitting on the sidelines cheering for me. She either wanted to play with me because we play softball together now in 2 nights a week. But just that time and that energy focused in her direction, because she knew that I gave all of my time and energy to my kids at school. And then I tried to come home, and that's how I decompressed. I would go work out. I would go play sports or, do stuff like that. And I wasn't really looking out for her and her feelings, but it was never fully communicated until that one time where it came to a head, and it was just like, oh my gosh. So I ended up canceling, bowing out of the game that I was going to that night, and saying, hey, something's come up. I got to take care of it. And we sat down and literally talked for a better part of 3 to 4 hours, and hashed everything out. And she's very, she internalizes and takes time to think about things. And sometimes it doesn't come up for a day or 2, maybe 3, or in this case, a couple months. I'm somebody that as soon as something happens, I have to get my thoughts out and kind of start throwing it out there. Usually, yeah, for the most part. But in this case, it was, I didn't know, but that's how she was feeling. And then it finally came down to it. So
I mean,
yeah.
the day of, it sounds like once she was able to voice that, that day you sat down and had a conversation. And
I stopped everything immediately.
Yeah.
I was like, nope, I'm not texting people. I texted to say, hey, I'm out tonight. I can't come and play, because that relationship is more important than, a game that I pay $45-50, for a full season to go play. It's not worth it. So I just stopped everything. We sat down and talked about it. So.
In a culture where I think there are at least some folks, if put in that same situation, would have felt agitated or frustrated that in this case, their spouse was telling them that they can't, or to cut back on something that they've always done and that they enjoy, right? So
Yeah.
if I call it pride or ego, whatever that is,
Mhm.
how did you approach your relationship and that conversation without that becoming like an issue or a point of contention?
And I'll be honest. It did. It was for the first little bit of the talk that we had. It was me telling her from my perspective, and her needing the time to process that. But I was super frustrated, super agitated. It wasn't a holy cow, I need to slow down right now. And just, I was like, why am I just hearing about this now? Because like I said, for the most part, I say things like, it comes out and I go, okay, this is how I feel. This is what needs to be done. This is what I think has to be done. I'm a fixer. I try to get things done and get it taken care of and get on with the issue. Take care of it and move on. And like I said, she's more intrinsic, more paying attention to everything, and kind of takes more time to internalize it. But so I was super frustrated that this was the first time that I'd heard about it, and she hadn't voiced it before.
Sure.
So the first little bit of it was us trying to come to a common ground where, hey, you held on to this so long that now it's coming out, and I didn't notice it when I should have. So we were both kind of going, okay, you both
kind of played a role in that.
We both screwed the pooch a little bit on both sides. So,
sure,
it wasn't her fault. It wasn't my fault. It was just, we did not communicate properly because we hadn't, everybody jumps into marriage and goes, oh my God, marriage is going to be perfect. And
it's work.
They forget that it's work, it's communication. And we hadn't figured out how to communicate because we communicate two totally different ways. Even though we'd been dating for 4, almost 5 years before we got married. And it was just, it was very interesting to see how, even like, we could talk so much about everything else before we were married, but it just kind of didn't go away. But it just felt like the same old, and didn't feel like we had a problem. So
did she ever provide clarity to why she had waited a few months? I mean, because if I'm putting myself in her shoes, a lot of things are coming to mind. Hey, like, we're in a transition, like, I'm trying to get used to it, or I know this is important to him, and I don't want to like feel that I'm impeding. Like, there's so many avenues to that.
Yeah. Well, and so I can't remember the exact pieces, but I do know that there was a mention of, like you said, not trying to change me and change my schedule from what I've been doing, because it's been what I've been used to lately. And the other one is just that she was trying to get her bearings being here in a new area with no friends and not a lot of stuff to do. She's trying to adjust
at the same time.
She's trying to adjust for herself. Exactly. So it definitely wasn't something for her that was super focused until it just got to be enough, until it hit that point. And so, but those were two of the pieces that I do remember. There were probably a couple more, but
sure, it's been a hot minute.
it has been. This was the first, after we'd already been on our month-long honeymoon in Europe, backpacking, and then back here, and it was like the first, I think it was November. So after we got married, so a little bit more, just under 6 months. So it took a little bit to come out and build up. Yeah.
What is your communication, or the communication between the two of you look like now? I mean, we're talking years later.
There's still a little bit of a couple of those times where just like these small little things will slip through the cracks, like we expect to, but it's a lot easier for us to communicate now. I still think I say things and then I don't, or she still says things and I can't really get the full clarification, so I have to dig deeper, and I'm trying to get what she means. I still try to fix things all the time because that's who I am.
I'm trying to hide her from everybody.
No,
I just saw her head a second ago.
No, that was my head. Anyway,
For anyone that rewinds the video, if you're watching it on YouTube, that's Rachel.
maybe she did, but
or I'm losing my shit.
maybe you are, but we're both getting old, so maybe it could be that. But yeah, we've gotten a lot better, so it's easier for when I see that she's frustrated. I'll give her some time and some space, and then or if I'm getting frustrated, she'll give me time and space, and then we'll come together and we'll talk about it. It's still not perfect.
Oh, sure.
Like we were saying. So
I think that's what makes communication exciting and creates its own perfection. Is it's something that you constantly strive for, right?
You have to. Yeah.
And it's the small misses of the mark that allows a couple, and when I say that, I'm not saying even romantically, right? So whether it's you and a friend or it's any relationship, doesn't have to imply intimacy.
Your boss, your friends, your family, your coworker, your lover, whomever. It does. It takes a lot of work, and sometimes that can be draining, especially if you're putting a whole lot of effort into a whole lot of different relationships.
Oh, absolutely. It's the small marks that we miss that we're when we actually talk about them and we find a solution or a resolution, it strengthens the bond of that relationship. Even like you said, even with the boss. So you're trying to approach a thing and figure something out, and you come to a head, you're able to talk about it and figure it out. It typically increases your level of, I'm going to say, respect for that person.
Yeah, and so what we've turned it into now is, especially because I'm not the greatest player in the world for the sports that we play, but like I'm decent at it, and so people always ask me to come and play and do this and do that and help them out on their teams and sub and whatever. But so now it's not that I check with her to see if I can. It's just, hey, what am I missing? If I was to do this, what am I missing? Am I taking too much time away from us, or do you have something that's going on that I can take the time and go play in this? Like if you're working, then you're not home. So, what do you think we can do? Can we make that work? And it's for everything. It's for her internship that she's doing currently. It's for my work schedule or games and stuff that my students want me to come and watch. It's opened up a whole lot more communication avenues for us, because we'll stop and we'll go, okay, this is how we used to do it. And we need to make sure that we're focusing on how we're trying to move forward to communicate to each other now. So like I said, still not perfect, but
you're highlighting the beauty of this whole thing. And that is learning from the past mistakes in communication. Again, not that you're going to nail it every time, and nobody does.
No.
Right?
No.
It would take so much intentionality, and sometimes I know it's going to sound like an excuse, but it's the honest truth, is that life gets busy and in ways that we can't even anticipate. So I mean, if I use the pandemic and loss of loved ones and all of this stuff, I mean, even for just Tracy and I, the last 2-3 years had in large part been a giant shit show.
Here.
And it takes intentionality to make sure that we are doing well and communicating well of our affections for each other, but also in what our needs are and navigating things and wanting to spend time.
And one of the interesting things about communication is that it's super funny, because as humans, we grow and change.
Yeah,
we're constantly changing. If you're the same person you were when you were 12 years old, you're doing something wrong.
Severely stunted.
Yeah, something like that. You are just in reach out to Melvin and get some help. But the thing is that while we're growing and changing, the people that we're in our relationships with as well are growing and changing. And so there's things that didn't used to block communication that maybe she's a little bit more sensitive to now, or the same with me. Some part of me that's changed, that I go, wow, that kind of really irritates me now. The way that we communicate that way, I don't like it anymore. And so you're always trying to, like you said, it's almost, well, not like you said, but it's almost like a chess match. You're always constantly trying to figure out what your next move is to make sure that you keep focused on the board. And it's like, how if you're doing it in so many different places, can you consistently remember how to do it with each and every person? And that's the thing that is going on. It's like you're playing 50 chess games at the same time.
Yep.
And Bobby Fischer, I am not. So
which I think is a really good metaphor, as long as we have the clarity that the people in your life, your partner, isn't your competitor, right?
Mhm.
It would be like playing duels chess.
Yeah.
So you're each moving a piece, but you're playing as a team, and you're trying to anticipate in a good way how your partner's going to make their next move, so then you can play off of that well, right?
Yeah, it is. It's the same with sports, soccer. Soccer is a bigger one, especially because both of us played. But you're always trying to anticipate where the next pass should go, because you're not going to pass it to the person. You're passing it ahead of the person. Same with quarterbacks. You're passing it in front of the person to have them run on and catch it. And it's just that kind of anticipation that you have to have. And dare I say, none of us are perfect at it.
Yep. I think that is a wonderful image to leave off on. And that is for all of us to have a little more intentionality of where we're going to throw the ball.
Yeah, where we're going to toss it. Just make sure that we're leading them and not putting it back behind them where we used to communicate.
Let's set up the people that are in our lives for success.
Absolutely.
Catch a Hail Mary sometimes. Thank you so much, Will. I really appreciate you popping in, of course, and having a chat and creating the lovely sign that y'all might see on Will's left side. A little shameless plug for the JTM community. Both, of course, the Facebook. I think you have the Facebook on there. The symbols are gone, so I can't quite see them.
Oh, sorry. I've got Facebook, Spotify, YouTube, and then
there we go.
And then the j-tm.community, just the online one up there, because I didn't want you to have to go through it all by yourself all the time. So I'm here to support you because I love you, man.
I love you too, bud. Thanks again. Branson, when you think of the idea of communication, what comes to mind for you? What does that mean to you?
For me, a lot of communication background goes to my college kind of things. And where I think of communication, it's that difference between a formal and informal, and you've got your verbal and nonverbal communication. And to kind of further go on top of that, most relationships, in my opinion, the basis of any relationship starts and ends with communication.
Yeah, absolutely. When you say formal and informal, what does that mean?
Formal, informal. So when you're speaking to a boss or a work email or something, you're not going to keep it casual. You're not going to treat it like you're talking to a buddy where you're not worried about what you say kind of thing. You're keeping it more clear and concise. It's more of a concrete message that you're delivering, so you don't want anything kind of lost in translation. So you're keeping it professional, essentially.
Okay, so kind of the idea of like a professional approach to communication compared to a personal or like a private life style. Casual, I think is the word you use.
Yeah.
Okay. And you had mentioned the verbal and nonverbal as well, which I think is absolutely spot on when it comes to shifts and changes. Because you mentioned, I feel that every relationship starts and ends with communication, right? So when you think of you're using that idea of relationships, and not just romantically, it could be family, could be friends, right? Coworkers, colleagues, any of those relationships. What has been your evolution of communication over time? So I'm gonna spill the beans just briefly based on what our morning has been, right? So Branson gave a wonderful opportunity to actually exercise communication. We had a scheduling hiccup, if you will, right? And both of us went back and forth, and I would argue communicated very, very well, right? It was just like, oh, nope, made this mistake. Hey, nope, all good here. Are you good? Yep, we're okay. Let's look at a different time. Direct, right? There was no like bullshit or it's just like, hey, making sure everyone's good and then we're good to go. And we're able to do that in like 15 minutes compared to if we didn't communicate or communicated to a lesser degree. So when you think of communication, again, I'm using today as a bit of a staple because you just did, and you did it very well. Has it always been that way?
Most definitely not. I mean, growing up in high school, you kind of just, you're in that stage of truly learning. So, I mean, that kind of stage of your life it is what it is. I mean, it's definitely a learning process. And then for me, I went to the military, and that's when a lot of my communication was kind of started in a more, a constant like learning process of taking what I had learned and really focusing it towards something. Cause I mean, anything dealing with the military, it's a clear and concise message. Say it in as few words as possible and get the message out so that everybody else knows exactly what's going on, kind of thing, so that the mission can continue. Going on from the military, I get back to my home life, and I've still got kind of that military mindset. And I know that a lot of times people would be looking to me for some sort of communication, and it would just be very direct. It would be very blunt. I don't give a lot of nonverbal cues when I speak. So a lot of times people can't figure out if I'm joking, if I'm serious.
Oh, like can't pick up if you're being sarcastic.
Yeah, I can't pick up if I'm being sarcastic, joking about anything. And I mean, I know it gives Shay a difficult time in trying to figure out what's going on with me, because even talking about or communicating, say, like what was going on with me medically kind of stuff, and kind of allowing whatever was going on with me to kind of continue and to see, okay, is whatever I've got going on right now, is this just kind of like a thing that's going to go away with time? Like my gut, like for example, like my gut, okay, it starts to hurt kind of thing, having the symptoms and all that. Is this something that's going to go away on its own? Is this just like okay, my body's just going through a funk? Or is this a long-term thing? Okay, it's a long-term thing. How bad is it? Okay, it's kind of bad. Maybe I should bring this up to somebody else and maybe start looking at this. So I'm where I can try and figure out how to condense that time frame of waiting and actually just talk about it right off the get-go.
Sounds like trying to adjust the threshold, whereas in the past it has to get X bad before it's worth me putting on somebody else's shoulders. Or based on how you said that is why I'm choosing to use those words. You feel that it's a concern or a burden, versus now trying to shift it to say, hey, no, this is a partnership. So if something's a little hinky, it's okay that I mention that, even if I don't know the exact details or what's going on, if it's short term, long term, but it's having an impact on me, and by default, she deserves to know that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what is the line? I'm gonna guess there's a fine line between engaging in support and communicating as you just described, but also trying not to cause unnecessary worry.
I mean, it is a very fine line. And I think that's more or less where that time frame kind of deviates, where it has a decent left and right deviation, where I'm trying to find a condensed spot where I can just say, hey, this is what it is, kind of thing. It's pretty difficult. So, I mean, as far as where that fine line is, I don't know where it is yet. I'm still trying to figure it out.
Sounds like it's a moving mark, right? So some days it could be over here, or you have a greater range for sure.
And I feel it probably, I guess, would probably deal with like the severity of what's going on, kind of thing. If I don't feel it's a big deal, I'll be more apt to bring it up. If I feel like it's going to be a burden, and I mean, that's just me putting my own opinion on it. If I think it's going to be a burden on someone, I'll let it slide a little bit to see if it course corrects itself, kind of thing, or if I need intervene on my own or with support.
That being said, for somebody who would admit to being stubborn to a fault and tends not to seek the support or help, how do you communicate or work yourself up to communicating when you're prone to just not ask for the support?
Being able day in and day out to kind of see that regardless of what I got going on,
Mm-hmm.
I know I'll be supported,
Mm.
be it through friends and family. So
Mhm.
it's more or less me letting my own kind of walls, and I mean truly like walls and stuff down to
Yeah.
allow for the help to come and kind of be able to say like, hey, or communicate like, hey, this is what's going on.
Mhm.
And regardless of my feelings or how I'm feeling about it, just to be able to put that out into like the universe kind of thing. And
Yeah.
I mean, for anybody that needs to hear it kind of thing, to kind of guide me or help me along the way, so to speak.
So it's really practice. You've done it and you've seen what the response is, and that people do, love and care and want to support you. So it's through actually doing it that you're learning, hey, this is okay to do.
Oh, and absolutely. And I mean, truly before, and I met Shay, it was, I would bring things up. And I think that's where my left and right deviation kind of on it is truly is shrinking, is because before I didn't have a lot of outlets to where I feel like I could comfortably bring what I had going on to somebody's attention. Like even my folks growing up, like I could, but I didn't feel like there was be any kind of positive outcome to it. It'd just been like an acknowledgement, and I'd be like, okay, cool, move on with the day. So I could already do that myself without even having brought that up. But
Yeah.
with Shay, I definitely I've been able to come to a point where just our conversations just over the years kind of thing, it's just
Mhm.
been able to find where I'm that, like I said, that left and right deviation is very much smaller than it was previously.
Yeah, I get the feeling that Shay would be way more upset with you if something was going on and you didn't tell her than
Oh,
if
yeah.
you did.
100%. She'd want to whoop my ass.
Yeah, what the fuck, Branson? This has been going on for how long?
Yeah.
So let's focus a little bit more on that relationship, because you said just a moment ago, you said before you and Shay were together, it looked very differently.
Mm-hmm.
What about that dynamic or that relationship gave you the courage, if it's okay to say that, to be able to engage with that more, to have a healthier style or approach to communication?
I think in like overall, short and long, kind of with that, is her and I have worked more so with the communication over the years, whereas previous relationships we didn't really work. I mean, it was kind of a we existed together kind of thing, and it wasn't with a common goal, I suppose. It's just that early kind of love relationships kind of thing. But I know with Shay's, I mean, there's just the trust there. And knowing that the trust is there is a huge foundation for the communication side of it. So I think, I mean, just having the trust with her and knowing regardless if I bring something up, it won't be judged, or it might be judged, but we'll figure it out kind of thing. And I mean, that's another side of it that I'm also learning is I can bring shit up that it could be a shitty situation, or it might be the incorrect, but we can at least bring it up, talk about it, and kind of find a resolution on that side of things too.
Yeah, that at the end of the day, we'll figure it out. It'll be okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. When it comes to, and you used a key word, I feel, and that's trust. And communication looks very, very different when folks don't trust, right? Because then they communicate out of fear, which they tend to avoid things. They tend not to say the things that need to be said, or they tend not to address the things that need to be focused on. What about your relationship, or I shouldn't say that, what about you, her, and your relationship that allowed you to have that trust or helped you create that trust?
What about the relationship?
About yourself, about Shay, or the dynamics in your relationship that allowed you to have the trust or build it? Because I assume that you didn't meet her one day and be like, hey, I trust this person completely. And she didn't meet you and be like, hey, he's a cool guy, I'll trust him completely. And I know that the two of you had some exposure even before you entered into a relationship as well. So you had that going for you.
Yeah. I mean, as far as like a time, like looking at the relationship, I mean, it started off like any kind of normal one did, but I don't know. I feel like we've always communicated well. It's just not as deep as it, like, as far as the communication went in the last probably 2 or 3 years, especially in the last year now. I don't have a time, like, or a specific point where I can say like it kind of clicked, because even like before we were married, I felt like I knew like she was gonna be the one
That's
like
awesome.
that did it for me.
It's kind of like
So-
love, that
Huh?
it's kind of like love in the sense that it just kind of grows, and one day like you kind of notice it, versus there's this very specific moment and then, hey, like this is the person.
Yeah, that is probably the best way I would be able to put it in my own words. I mean, that's really kind of what it came or is like for me.
Mm-hmm. The when I was talking with Shay, what was it, last week or the week before, and she was touching on the idea of communication. She's coming from the avenue of emotion regulation and how it's important to do that within communication, and more so, even more so within a relationship. When it comes to this is me trying to be objective looking at the two of you. So Shay is emotionally active, if that is even a word, and then you are more emotionally not. Is that fair?
Yeah.
So how do those two dynamics, knowing that you've both expressed communication and trust, but you're also very, very different, right? How do you navigate that through communication? Because your style of communication is also very, very different.
I don't know that I think about it often, actually, and I just kind of find it funny, but I think it's more we balance each other. Like her emotions are so forward and mine are so suppressed that them combining, I think it's able to work. And yeah, just kind of going over, as far as conversations go, I mean, I would try to be clear and concise kind of thing right off the start. And she would be very emotion forward right off the start. And so it was kind of a back and forth to where I realized I don't have to be as clear and concise, but I can involve emotion during our conversations. And she could use less emotion and bring in more clear and concise, and truly like think about what it is that's bothering her to be able to communicate it, and then what's bothering me to be able to communicate it, but also for me to be able to say it without just coming across as just like a straight-faced asshole that doesn't seem like there's any emotional connection to the conversation even happening.
Yeah.
And I know that's something I've worked on often over the last bit of time, is just trying to bring some form of emotion to the conversation, because I know I just monotone, blank, don't give a lot. So
you probably give a little bit more than you're giving yourself credit for, but I think there's about 50% that's hidden behind the beard.
Yeah.
Like all the emotions behind the beard. It's like saying, hey, I'm naked under these clothes, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you so much, but I really appreciate it. What I really hear you saying, especially at the end here, is that idea of balance, and that it's not a one size fits all in how we communicate to people. It's finding the way to communicate to individuals the best that you can. And sometimes that's more expressive or less expressive or more concise or more emotionally driven. Again, there's no one size fits all, and throughout the relationship between the two of you, you've begun to develop and figure out how to communicate better with one another. And I think that is, I mean, I couldn't put it in better words. So thank you so much again, Branson. I really appreciate it, buddy.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, man.
Yeah. And thank you so much for tuning in to our episode on communication. I hope that you got some kind of inspirational or insight or motivation through our dialogue with Mason, Will, and Branson based on relationship, what communication looks like, what healthy communication can look like, what unhealthy communication look like. I know through our experience and our dialogue, we've had a couple of aha moments for ourselves as well, kind of along the way. Of course, if you want to touch base with me for advancement advisement, you can do so through j-tm.community/podcast, which is also where you can send your thoughts, your feedback, your questions. You can submit your vote at that same area. You can also check out our Facebook, which is made for a one-click voting polls, engagement, interacting with the community, and things of that sort as well. If you want to look at additional resources, both to the Mount Pleasant, Michigan area or national resources, you can also find those on our site. Of course, if you're liking our content, don't hesitate to like and subscribe, whether that would be on YouTube or through Spotify as well. Again, engaging on Facebook is always helpful. If we get enough questions, we're going to create a Q&A episode. Again, thank you so much for tuning in and for being part of a community that you can bank on and where you belong.